What I want to talk today about is the work we've been doing around human AI interaction. And I'm just going to show here, the chat GPT style interface, but they've all kind of more or less, pick your large language model. They all have a similar interface. And this is, in a way, becoming, I think, the new interface for knowledge work. After all these years in HCI, congratulations, this is the end point, the current point. There's some focus there on where this might go next. So I was at a talk at Imperial College London last week where James Landay from Stanford was talking about multimodal AI interactions. Certainly that maps to my everyday interaction. I speak a lot to my chatbot as a quick way of interacting with it. And I'm not going to focus on that kind of input. I think whether it's text or voice, that's one thing, and whether we've got something whispering in our ear or we're actually reading screen. I'm going to focus more on the kind of activities that people are using these tools for. And I think currently in knowledge work, so think of maybe how you're all using this kind of technology, it's to produce essays, reports, reviews, slide decks, papers, these types of things. And it helps with this. I'm a daily user of this technology, and my personal productivity has increased since the advent of these large language models. So in one sense, this looks like a big breakthrough. We've made it much easier to... The promise of the early desktop computers were thinking machines. And I think arguably what this breakthrough has done is, for the first time, actually made a genuine thinking machine, a thinking partner, something that we can actually have a conversation with and develop our ideas with in progress. But this is the point. I think it's tempting, despite how powerful this is, I think it's tempting to think that producing the artifact of work is work. The deeper question is what that preparation, what it reveals about the things that we're producing. Because the paper, the slide deck, these are just proxies for work production. What's behind that, the process of that curation process or the production process, I think is more important. So was AI used to extend thinking or bypass it? So Advait Sekar at Microsoft Research talks about this idea of congratulations, we've solved the problem of thinking, right, by offloading it. And that's one way of looking at these tools. Another way of looking at them is that they complement thinking and allow us to develop our ideas faster, better, in a more kind of round way. And I'm going to argue that the real test comes not in the production of the artifact, but in the ability of the person to actually talk about it. So the question is, what does the final artifact tell us about what was produced? What do we learn about the process behind it? Did the author challenge the ideas, check assumptions, revise, compare, rehearse their understanding, or did they simply generate something, copy and paste, and move on? And if we think, I'm going to start off by talking about students, because I think this is probably where, certainly in universities around the world, the moral panic first set in. We've had a couple hundred years of devising student assessments that are premised on the idea of you producing an essay or a report. And now you can go to a chat bot and the student can say, write me an essay, 500 words, critically discussing the role of AI in higher education. They press go and it happens, right? All that years that used to be critical training, hard work, all those hours. I remember being a student spending hours at the computer, working on the paragraph to make sure the essay looked good. And now a computer can just produce it like that, right? So what does that mean for our educational establishments? What does it do? What does it reveal about their learning? Given that the thing that they are producing is cheap and easy to make now, what does that mean about the values that we make about the student and what their learning and understanding is? So the essay may be ready, but is the student? Is the deep question. I mean, this is picked up in research. So a Kai paper from a couple of years ago, I love the title here, the ghostwriter effect. So this is by Draxler and colleagues. The ghostwriter problem is simply that you don't recognize the words that you authored with large language models. As I said, I use these tools daily, and it happens, right? You reread an email that I sent, and I don't remember sending it. I don't remember engaging in any kind of cognitively deep way with the material. I just simply offloaded the process to the AI, and as a result, I don't recognize my own words. So this is like this is the consequence of offloading, if you like. And so it's a deep problem potentially. So what you can have are potentially similar scripts or emails or whatever, PowerPoint, papers, and the way in which they're produced can be very different. And we talked about this in our chat, Too Long Didn't Read It essay that was published at Kai a couple of years ago. And it was thinking about the work we'd done on error checking and really picking up this idea that there's one mode here, which is kind of generate, accept, submit. And there's another one where you're kind of like generating still, but then critically questioning, revising, iterating, checking, and explaining. And they both lead to a final product, an essay, an email, a paper, a report, a PowerPoint slide deck. But the underlying process, the depth of and the amount of interactions, and I think that's the key point here, is that those interactions with the chatbot, there will be digital signals there, right, that can be potentially looked at to infer more about the preparedness of the student or the person who produced the work, potentially. The output alone doesn't tell us about this, though. You need to go beyond that. So with a master's student I worked with this last summer, Sylvia Bodie, her work was helping to look at that. We did a survey of 100 UK university students and interviewed 12 master students about how they were using AI and assessed writing. The main finding was that AI use is selective and stage specific. Students don't simply use AI everywhere, and they do not use it in all the same way. And so this is the point. A lot of there was a lot of moral panic, if you like, in the UK university sector. And it's put into two categories. You're either using it or you're not using it. And we're trying to provide a bit more of a nuanced understanding here that, yeah, when you talk to students, 95% of our students are now using AI to support their learning. Why wouldn't they? But the ways in which they are using varies quite considerably. And going back to my point there about this kind of shallow versus deep, that's showing up a little bit, but also the stages they are choosing to use it for, but also choosing not to because they want to preserve their own voice or develop their own skills, say in writing or critical thinking. So they're not going to use it across the board to produce the work. So AI-supported writing is not just a question of adoption, it's a question of allocation, how the students are distributing control, effort, and responsibility across the writing process. And they're really being quite active in thinking about this for themselves. How, when, and in what way they're using these tools to both develop strong work, but also develop their own skills and produce something that they can stand behind. I think this goes back, there's a nice paper, Ferdinand's, in Computers in Human Behavior, published earlier this year. AI makes you smarter, but none the wiser. And this goes back to, so what I've been saying there is that students are kind of rationalizing their use of AI. And what Ferdinand's here argues is that this then opens up a kind of metacognition problem, your ability to think about your own thinking. And when you start, our ability to do that and to understand our own thinking, our own motives, highlight our own bias. I mean, there's a big, long tradition in psychology. Think of Kahneman and Tversky with biases and heuristics. People kid themselves or misunderstand their own thinking all the time. So this is essentially the metacognition problem. So what they did is they looked at people solving logical reasoning problems with ChatGPT. Performance improved compared to a no AI group, but the participants still substantially overestimated how well they had done. So they're using AI, they have improved, but they think they've improved way more than they have. So it's creating a bias, if you like, an overconfidence bias. So AI helped them get better answers, but it did not necessarily help them judge their own understanding more accurately. And this is a big blind side potentially in these tools, particularly a lot of the concern at the moment around this idea that these chatbots are designed to be people pleasers, sycophants, you know, and yes, boss, right away, boss. Of course, you're the most cleverest. The idea you had there was the most profound, elegant, beautiful thought that any human has ever had. And this is what your chatbot will tell you at every turn, right? And so you can start believing. And sometimes you need that critical friction to be told, actually, that's a pretty obvious idea. And that's really a key point here for this talk. Sylvia's paper does not claim that all AI use is shallow or harmful. Many students that we spoke to describe it as thoughtful and selective, but it does show why the final text alone is not enough to evidence the learning or what's really going on in terms of the student's head and what they really understand. And this matters for the future, right, when we're thinking about training the next generation. So we had a paper not a paper, this is more of a commentary in the Times Higher Education, where we thought about this problem for education, and particularly looking at the long view of how education has happened in the UK over a long time period. So obviously you have institutions where I'm at, like UCL, which were a Victorian institution, past couple hundred years, larger number of students. But when you look back to, say, Oxford and Cambridge, which are older institutions, medieval, they didn't have students writing essays. Essay writing was not really a thing. It was all about oral presenting defense, so all about being conversational. And we have this still in the UK system for PhDs. I don't know how the PhD defense works here. I mean, I'd love to know more, actually. But in the way it works in the UK is that after your period of being a PhD student, you sit with two other experts who you've not met before and have a conversation about your work. And it's their job to ask you difficult questions and to challenge your work and for you to defend it and explain it in a conversational style. And I think that's one of the things that we value in the UK PhD training program, is that ability to be conversational in the topic and to own the decisions. And that's what that's looking at, assessing. And AI can't help really prepare for that. There's no like read the paper. It's going beyond the paper. You need to be able to say what it is you did and why. More recently, we've been looking out away from, so if that first bit of the work was looking at students, we've also been looking at knowledge workers, so people who work in tech. And so let's just think about a common example here, preparing a slide deck. I'm sure everyone in this room has prepared a slide deck. I prepared this slide deck on Saturday. AI can be used to test titles, organize the argument, sharpen the transition, rehearse objections. That could be deep engagement, but it could help you arrive at a presentation in a prepared style. But I could also ask AI to produce a polished deck and script, then stand here and read it out loud without really owning the argument. Why am I saying this? I don't know. This is what I'm saying. It's like AI can be used to produce these things, and then you're just like, and then you're off script. Where do you go? And so how does this play out in the world of work? So Nancy, she is a PhD student working with Anna Cox and me at the moment. She has been looking at workplace studies, and she found workers used AI regularly, but they used it for their own private preparation, and then they went to great lengths to not engage with the material they're producing, but just simply to scrub the AI away. So they would use it to produce the slide deck, to produce the email, to reproduce the report, and they'd go in there and carefully clean it to remove all the little signatures and telltale phrases that might suggest to their superior or to their colleague that they used AI. And they were quiet about it, secretive. And a colleague of mine, Albert Sekar, talks about AI shaming. So I think it is something around the kind of using these support tools, private support tools, but I think we're still at this place where there is revealing the use of it is still, it depends on the environment, the work environment. So when it's unclear how your superior or how your boss or your colleague is going to take to you saying, I used AI to do my work, if they're going to be like, then you're going to be quiet about it, which is a real shame, because I think, as the title of the paper says, if you're clever, no one knows you've used it. And that was one of our participants said this. But I think that's a real danger, because it means that when you start producing that kind of culture in a workplace, you start losing transparency and accountability. So there's a real threat there, I think, going forward. So I've been increasingly interested about what these traces of preparation might reveal. So when you're using AI to produce work, it leaves traces: prompts, revisions, comparisons, checks, pasted text, ignored suggestions. All of my chat history in preparing this talk or any other talk I've given recently or any grant proposal written, that is a lot of data. And one use of that data is obviously by the tech companies to understand how knowledge work is produced, but it could also be leveraged in a more supportive way potentially as not really good or bad, but they can give insights into the development of my thinking, right? Was I critically engaged? How much was I kind of internalizing and thinking deeply about the material? And presumably one might be able to assess that from the kind of signatures that I provided in all the chat threads that I've given this. So did I challenge the output? Did I check assumptions? Did I explore alternatives? Or did I simply just copy and paste the first plausible answer? The final artifacts shows what was produced. The preparation traces, though, may show how the person got there. And that's potentially something that's very useful and interesting, particularly as we start moving into that kind of what I talked about with Nancy Shee's work around group work. What do we then communicate to the group of people I'm working? Because that's where work is often really achieved. What might some of my private preparations reveal about what could be done for the group? And then I just want to close out with, so Shipping Chen is a student, PhD student who was working with me at UCL. And Shipping has had two really nice papers, a Kai paper published last month and a Kai work paper last year, looking at, so I talked about students and knowledge workers, and now I'm going to just name it, academics. A particular form of work that academics do is writing papers and reviewing them, so peer review. I think this is a fascinating problem because it's, in many ways, it describes many aspects of work, right? You're producing an artifact, a paper, that involves running studies, building a system, evaluating it, and then you write it up into this paper, you hand it out to some experts and they review it, and they make judgments on it and eventually arrive at an accept or reject decision or major revisions, whatever it is. It's clear that authors are using AI in the production of work now. I mean, these are tools for thinking. But there's a very thorny question there about how reviewers or editors should use AI to evaluate work. And so Shipping's work on AI-assisted peer review, the same pattern really appears as what we saw earlier in these other cases. The question is not simply whether AI can produce review-like text. So can I drop a paper into an AI system and tell it to review it for me? It's how the reviewer then uses that AI feedback to help inform their judgment of the work. And I think that's important. So reviewers can, well, we found evidence that reviewers of using large language models to summarize papers, retrieve information, improve phrasing in their reviews, check whether they'd missed something important. But the review itself is not, the writing of the review is not what a review is. A review is ultimately judgment of the work. And that feeling there about how that judgment is exercised, where we keep that human component, skill, expertise, and judgment. Is this making a novel contribution? Should this paper be accepted or not? The AI can't make that decision. You need human expertise to kind of think about all that they know about the context to make that call. But what the AI can potentially help with is the phrasing of that feedback to make it as constructive and useful as possible for authors. There's more to it. I'll leave Shipping to talk, is in the room here, so I'll leave Shipping to talk more about that work. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up fairly soon. Across these settings, so students writing essays, knowledge workers doing email, slide decks, and academics reviewing papers, we see the same potential problem here through AI use. And I like this phrase I've been coming to recently, the preparedness illusion. Someone can arrive with a fluent essay, a polished slide deck, a professional report, a well-written review, and still not be ready to explain, defend, or adapt it. The script is ready, but the person may not be because they've not internalized what it is they mean to say or what it is the work was about. So this is the question we're now taking forward. Knowledge workers increasingly prepare privately with AI. They use it to make sense of material, draft contributions, rehearse what they intend to say, and polish the artifact they'll bring into the room. But when they enter those meetings, vivas, presentations, reviews, discussions, where those contributions are questions, challenged, aligned, or turned into decisions, the question is whether they're able to explain, defend, adapt what AI helped produce. So this is more than just private AI preparation, it's turning it into accountable participation within the room. So this is kind of like a useful framing, I think, across these three settings: education, work, academia. You might think about the script, the artefact, maybe, that is a proxy for work. And then you might think about how that is then assessed in the moment. So bringing together, because ultimately work is about the sharing of ideas between people, right? And coming to some agreement. The paper is just a thing that is produced. It has to then be read by somebody else and be taken on board. So I think this opens up, as I said already, I'm going to repeat this point one more time. I think there's potentially a design opportunity here, designing AI for readiness. So generative AI will make scripts cheaper, faster, and more polished. That's technically interesting, and it is, we've in a way solved the problem of thinking. We're getting closer to understanding how humans think. One of the dreams of psychology is being realized through the development of these technologies. And that will change education, work, and scholarship. But the future of work does not depend only on whether AI can produce better scripts, it depends on what people then do with those in context. I found myself, does anyone like football? I don't usually watch football, but I found myself visiting a family member at the weekend, last weekend, and we're watching a football match. And in the Premiership, they've got basically AI-supported refereeing. So the game can be stopped and the referee can go watch the little replay. And this goal was allowed even though the AI or the video replay made it clear to anyone who watched it more than once that it should not have been a goal. But the referee still allowed it. He had all the technology, all the support, but still went with a particular decision. And many people would have said it was the wrong decision. But it doesn't matter because it's sport. And that is what sport is. That's why millions of people on this planet watch it every weekend. It's because it's the lived, live, consequential experience with a human making a split-second decision and being accountable for it. So thinking about how technology can sit there and support endlessly our ability to make better decisions. I could have an earpiece here telling me what to say next, but you still need a person to think about and in the moment and to own that decision. So how then do we build systems to support that, but making it that we're not simply, the reverse centaur, right? So the centaur is the horse's body and a human head. The reverse centaur is a horse's head on a human body. So we're being driven by the AI and just simply following instructions. we still need to own the decisions and be accountable for them, just using this as an additional data source to pick up stuff we might not have seen otherwise. So there's 3 things we can do here. First, we should design AI tools that support preparation, not just production. Tools should help people question, revise, compare, rehearse, and check their understanding, not simply generate a polished answer. Second, we should think about building moments of explanation into education and work. This might be things like site vivas, project discussions, review conversations, design critiques, anything that kind of gets people to really kind of stand up and talk about their work. And third, we need to handle preparation traces carefully. Prompts, drafts, edits, revisions. I think it's clearly a goldmine of data, and that's what these AI technology companies are interested in. How should that be used and brought from a private space into a public shared space, I think is going to be a fascinating question we go forward in the next era, in the next period. But I think how we navigate this is going to be very important, not just for works, but for jobs, but also for training as well. There is going to be a difference between offloading production and offloading thinking. The future of knowledge work should not be AI speaking for us. The AI should be helping us arrive ready to speak for ourselves. And that's what I have to say. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the time with you this morning.